This anime is banned across the globe, and that's usually where a discussion of this anime, art piece, whatever you want to call it, starts and stops. Shoujo Tsubaki, or Midori, is a shocking Ero Guro film that sets out to make the viewers extremely uncomfortable, and it really succeeds in doing so. It is often included in top 10 banned or unsettling anime lists. Yeah, that's where I first learned about this anime over a decade ago. I decided to track it down and watch it. What can I say? I was a stupid, edgy kid, I was a fan of blood on the dance floor, and I watched Attack on Titan for the gore. In case it needs to be said, this anime is not really suitable for minors or the vast majority of people, to be honest, and viewer discretion is heavily advised. Yes, the dog does die. This video is not a deep dive into the actual story of Midori though. It's more of a look at its history, origin, production, whatnot, all the fun things surrounding this series. And by series, I mean single anime, because it is just a 45 to 50 minute film. So while this video may not discuss the sensitive topics present in Midori in depth, I still want to issue a warning just in case hearing about it even adjacently is upsetting for you. Midori, or Shoujo Tsubaki, is often reduced to its clickbait status of being banned in most countries. But there's got to be more to Midori than the nihilistic shock factor misery porn that it's made out to be. Art, even art that is deemed disgusting, usually has a purpose. Something to say, a reflection of the world it was created in, a vent of some kind from the artist. It's gotta be something. It's easy to dismiss something that makes us uncomfortable, especially when the subject matter is widely accepted as something that is just nasty and morally reprehensible. But to ignore a work's history and the context in which it was made, not only does the art a disservice, but it also does ourselves a disservice. So today, I wanted to take this weird, messed up anime I watched as a teenager and put it into its historical and cultural context. Yeah, we're English classing the banned anime. First things first, to understand why Midori is the way that it is, we've got to understand what Ero Guro even is. As a genre, Ero Guro is a type of art that focuses on eroticism, sexual corruption, and decadence. And if you're anything like me and you need to look up what decadence even is, it refers to the late 19th century movement that was all about sensationalism, the bizarre, the perverse. They are sexualizing violence out here. As an art genre, it is definitely not for everyone, evoking feelings of discomfort and disgust, which is kind of the point. The genre seeks to combine sexual and romantic themes with grotesque horror. Most commonly body horror, mutilation, disfigurement, transformations, horror that depends on the human body doing or being something that it shouldn't. Ero Guro as a genre capitalizes on the morbid curiosity of man, showing the grotesque and putting the changes on full display, making the viewer want to know more. What is that thing? It's that desire to understand that keeps us engaged with things we would otherwise want to turn away from and never look at again. There's also the idea that the body being torn apart and put back together in a new form symbolizes change. To be grotesque is to change, and to become something that you are not. However, in Ero Guro, that grotesqueness is not always a bad thing. Change can be good, actually, and change can empower. Perhaps a statement on the changing culture in Japan during the 1920s when this genre kind of became a thing, or the change that future Ero Guro artists are seeing or desire to see in their day-to-day lives. Another common theme within Ero Guro is surrealism, blurring the lines between reality and fantasy. This sort of style of storytelling creates a sense of unease by presenting the audience with an abstract view of things and challenging our perceptions. Kind of like the movie Perfect Blue, although Perfect Blue isn't really an Ero Guro film. It just plays with that surrealism very well. The actual art styles that are most common in this genre range from Japanese folk art style to a more common anime-esque style. However, most examples that I have seen tend to use more of like a realism style or Japanese folk art influences. For those out there who are like me and learn best by example, some examples of well-known Ero Guro works are Mai-chan's Daily Life, Violent Jack apparently, Corpse Party, and Magical Girl Apocalypse. I've also seen Junji Ito's works be classified as Ero Guro, and stylistically that does seem to check out, although there does seem to be a little bit of discourse surrounding what is and isn't classified as an Ero Guro. A lot of people looking for Ero Guro recommendations are really mostly looking for things that would be classified as porn, which, fair, to each their own. However, it is important to note that works that can be considered Ero Guro are not always porn. And the hentai genre of Guro is its own separate thing. Sure, it's an offshoot of Ero Guro, but it is its own thing. Ero Guro as a movement stems from the pre-war Japanese subculture Ero Guro Nansensu, erotic gore nonsense. This subculture sought to explore the deviant, bizarre, and ridiculous. It's got its start in pre-war Japan, gaining popularity during the Great Depression in 1929. As is any subculture, Ero Guro was a form of resistance and societal critique. The 1920s in Japan was a bit wild, socially speaking. Coming off of World War I, Japan was in the Taisho period, which was characterized by social unrest, reckless consumerism, and increased westernization. Some people were feeling like Japan was losing its identity due to outside influences from the Western hemisphere, basically. This created the perfect environment for the weird and the freaky. There are a few disputed reasons as to why this may have taken off. Exploration of societal freedoms in regards to sexuality, morality, and intellect, satire of Western ideals, a rebellion against state-sanctioned values. Could be anything, could be all of the above. It's probably all of the above. As time went on, Japan started to crack down on what was seen as immorality from radical leftists. And in response to this crackdown, the Ero Guro genre became darker and more nihilistic. Political unrest brought a violent critique of the current emperor, which, from my understanding, was taboo, if not just straight up illegal. Not that critiquing the emperor would be illegal, but like depictions, and I guess like negative depictions of the current emperor was not really allowed. I think that's what I've read. Alongside the peak of Ero Guro, there was also a new youth culture that focused on being modern, adapting counterculture and Western fashion and values. Girls with short hair and long legs, and incidentally, society's scapegoat for the Western corruption of traditional values. There was an air of freedom, including sexual liberation, that was not ideal for a traditional Japanese lifestyle. This idea of a modern girl was often included in Ero Guro works, whether it was a sympathetic portrayal of this archetype or a boogeyman figure, a girl that threatened the male ego essentially and was punished for it. In some ways, Ero Guro could be seen as progressive, and in other ways it was violently misogynistic. However, it wasn't all bad. Ero Guro also explored queerness. Horror has always been a space where LGBT identities could be explored more so than other genres, even if the representation was the evil monster. It was still an exploration that just wasn't present in other genres. Ero Guro is no different, and despite queerness being depicted as deviant, not all works condemned it. Ero Guro sparked the first wave of media interest in queer sexuality and gave LGBT creators a space to portray their own experiences. So, Ero Guro has a rich history of protest, counterculture, and giving a space to the non-traditional and experimental ideas. It was also usually indie works, individually published, but it still had its influences on the greater cultural zeitgeist and manga industry. The magazine Garo is the most known Ero Guro magazine, and it's often credited as the indie magazine that inspired other well-known mangakas like the creator of Astro Boy,
to make their own indie magazines where they were able to explore story ideas and story themes that wouldn't normally be accepted in something like Shonen Jump or whatever was the traditional popular manga magazines at the time. So it fostered an air of creativity that otherwise would have been stifled out.
Speaking of manga, now that we know what Ero Guro is, how does that tie into Shoujo Tsubaki? Well, the anime that is so infamous was actually an adaptation of an adaptation. Kind of. The original Shoujo Tsubaki, or the Camellia Girl, is a character archetype found within kamishibai, a form of Japanese street theater that was popular during the 1930s. Kamishibai were performed by traveling narrators on street corners, and they usually had illustrated boards on a mini stage and narrated the story as they changed out the images. The creation of the Camellia Girl character and her story is traditionally attributed to a creator known as Seiyuin, but the true origins aren't entirely clear. It was common and even normal for popular stories to be plagiarized and retold in many different variants. The baseline, though, was that the Camellia Girl was a young girl, somewhere in her teens or preteens, that was from a destitute family. She'd sell camellia flowers until she ended up being sold or forced to join what's essentially a circus of some kind. However, this Camellia Girl character is most known through the manga reinterpretation by Tsuehiro Maruo. This is where Ero Guro becomes a part of the equation, by the way. Tsuehiro Maruo is a well-known Ero Guro artist. The story of Shoujo Tsubaki was first retold as a short story that was part of an anthology, and then again retold as a full-length manga that delved a little bit deeper. The basic premise being that Midori, our main character here, is the Camellia Girl. She's a young girl who lives with her bedridden mother. In order to have any sort of income for the family, Midori drops out of school and sells camellia flowers in the city. This is how she meets Koijiro Arashi, a man who invites her to visit him if she ever needs help. When she returns home that evening, Midori discovers that her mother is dead. Distraught and now an orphan, Midori seeks out the man who promised to help her. She visits Arashi, who takes her to his street circus, having her become a behind-the-scenes member or a servant of some sort. During her time working for the show, Midori suffered a lot of abuse, assault, and torture at the hands of the performers. It's very brutal, and at some point, the show begins to struggle financially. Looking for a way to make more money, Arashi hires a magician named Masamitsu. This magician takes a liking to Midori, and he becomes a guardian for her, protecting her from the abuse and also grooming her into loving him and becoming his child bride. Masamitsu is a grown middle-aged man, by the way, and Midori is like 12. Masamitsu is also very controlling and does things to keep Midori trapped under his thumb. He kills one of the performers after they confess their love to Midori. He does everything in his power to keep her trapped in this situation. And eventually Midori does grow afraid of Masamitsu, and he eventually starts abusing her himself when she takes interest in leaving to pursue being an actress. Arashi eventually runs away with the circus's money, leaving the troupe behind and forcing them to disband. Midori and Masamitsu go together. However, the happy ending that Midori thought she was getting is cut short when Masamitsu gets stabbed to death by a thief while he's out buying food on his own. Midori is left abandoned at the bus stop, unaware of what happened. She begins to think that Masamitsu never actually cared for her, and that's probably true, and that he left her on purpose. In her despair, Midori envisions the circus troupe mocking her again, and she attacks them until they disappear. Things end with Midori alone, sobbing. It's honestly an open ending, and many do believe that it's implied Midori either just went crazy or took her own life. Maruo gave the Camellia Girl a brutal story, chocked full of gore, body horror, and disturbing events. Many criticize the story as just being an exploitation of Midori's misery, which I guess is a very fair interpretation. Midori just cannot catch a break, and it's just one bad thing after another. Regardless of how you feel about the story though, this adaptation is considered a classic of Maruo's work. We can also appreciate how the horrific nature of the things portrayed in the story are not diminished or romanticized. Nothing is actually taken lightly. Is it sad that that's a positive point for this work? A lot of times horrible things like assault do get romanticized or trivialized in media, so I guess some people are just think it's nice to see it be treated as horrible as it actually is. While some may not agree with the presentation, Shoujo Tsubaki is about the exploitation of a young woman. Or child, honestly. Whether it's to garner sympathy for victims or to raise awareness, I don't think it's entirely fair to say that the story is just a filled, nasty piece of work. I think if that's all it was meant to be, we wouldn't spend any time on Midori's feelings, and instead just glorify the horrors that are done to her. But I will be the first to admit, maybe I don't understand the appeal to whatever fetishes this might appeal to. To me, though, this story is a very dark portrayal of extremely horrible exploitation that is meant to make the audience disturbed, to get them thinking and reflecting not only on their feelings, but the cruel world that would allow for these things to happen. Is Midori realistic? Maybe. To some degree, sure. People are dealt hopeless hands in life. People do suffer abuse and assault, and the things present in this story have happened, aside from the magic. But honestly, magical body horror, or just body horror in general, seeks to explore the limits that the human body can reach, the limits to which Midori are driven to through her abuse. And assault is pretty much a form of body horror in my opinion. Honestly, I'd also argue that physical intimacy in general can be seen as body horror, but that's not the point being made in this manga. Dealing with the aftermath of what Midori has gone through can create a separation of self and body, making the body a flesh prison and holding the person captive. Am I looking too much into the shock factor manga? Maybe. I've also read that the traditional kamishibai plays would also include senseless tragedy, but Midori would always be saved at the end, getting her happy ending. And this portrayal of her story could be a commentary on the exploitation of fictional suffering. That does lead to the question though, what does that mean for Maruo's version, where there is no happy ending? Where the suffering is endless and it's the only thing Midori knows, and what many view as she's suffering in vain here. Suehiro Maruo sought to create on his own terms, making his own style outside of catering to others that he would have to probably do if he published his manga in a more traditional mainstream magazine. Creating works that would fall into the more indie scene and Ero Guro genre gave him that freedom to explore his own style without having to appeal to the greater market. Perhaps it's this desire to be undesirable that drove Maruo to cut the happy ending and leave things as he did. It could also be argued that the alleged original intent is still intact with this version. Instead of giving Midori a happy ending though, the audience is left with feelings of despair and disgust, forcing us to reckon with the exploitation of pain in fiction, the extreme suffering of a child, and how our own consumption of Shoujo Tsubaki and stories like it contribute to this exploitation. But this video isn't really a defense or teardown of the actual contents of the story. I just find everything else around this manga and anime to be fascinating to learn about. Hiroshi Harada set out to make a film based on Tsuruhiro Maruo's manga. And from what I can tell, it is a pretty faithful adaptation. Hiroshi Harada had been working in the anime industry and grew tired of essentially being a cog in the machine. He'd made his own solo films before Midori, each with extremely limited animation and a very distinct style. After finding success with his film Lullaby, Harada was able to pursue his next ambitious project, Midori.
遠くでお家が燃えるよりめくらの黒犬くわえて走る滴るような椿ですあ、そこの山高帽のおじさんお花はいかがおや、こんな寂しいところで花売りかい
もっと賑やかなところでやればいい。
He'd initially tried to gain sponsors to fund the project. However, due to the controversial subject matter and the graphic animal abuse present in one of the very infamous scenes, he was unable to gain any backers. So Harada spent 5 years and his own life savings making the entire thing himself, painstakingly drawing and painting each scene. It's said that Midori contained over 5,000 illustrations, each done by Harada himself. That's kind of a lot. If you take the over 5,000 divided by 5, that's like basically 1,000 a year, which would be around 3 or more a day. And it's actually probably even more than that per day, because the 5 years it took him to make the film would also include writing it, capturing it on film, editing, sound design, music. Like, it wasn't just 5 years of just drawing. Love it or hate it, it cannot be denied that Midori contained a lot of work and technical skill. It takes time to make things, even a little film that's less than an hour, especially when there's only one person handling all the aspects of production. Harada was very dedicated to the craft though, and I can respect that. Admire it even. Once the film was complete, he didn't just simply release it though. Midori was created to be an experience. Harada would host screenings of the film that put the audience in the very circus environment that Midori predominantly takes place in. Screenings for Midori were shrouded in mystery, especially the first screenings. Attendees would navigate mazes to find their seats, interact with characters, and witness live theater, music, acrobatic acts. Really, anything that fit the vibe, mostly. Harada worked with underground performers to put on these screenings at independently ran theaters or a 3-ring tent, just like a circus. Alongside the film itself, there would be practical effects in person as well, like smoke machines and scattering fake cherry blossom petals and other immersive things. Advertising for these events would advertise the screening as a show, much like a circus performance. The film was never supposed to be a standalone thing, and those of us who have only watched it online or have physical copies miss out on the performances, speeches, and all the theatrics that makes a Midori screening a Midori screening. In a 2004 article I found, it was even stated that Harada never wanted the film to be released on home video. This does predate the 2006 DVD release, so I wonder what changed. The film has since become popular and well known amongst fans of Ero Guro and extreme cinema. Extreme cinema being pretty much the global term for works that include excessive violence and sex. Things like Battle Royale, Cannibal Holocaust, The Human Centipede. You know, movies that would be included in top 10 most disturbing movies or whatever. You can tell I watched a lot of top 10 videos when they were popular. I'm sure most of us did. There is an audience for media that disturbs and disgusts. Art is made to invoke feelings, spread a message even. And Midori succeeded in invoking feelings, that is for sure. As for the message, Hiroshi Harada is known for his body of work that conveys his political views and more radical ideas. I'm afraid I'm not familiar enough with what he's trying to say to really pick apart what is intended to be gained from Midori. And maybe it is a message that's lost without viewing the film in its full intended context. And that's if he's saying anything at all. I'm inclined to believe that someone who puts 5 years into a project and their own money and efforts is making a project that they're passionate about for whatever reason. Admiration for the artistry, a message they're dying to get out there, a cathartic piece to vent. There is a reason for making things, despite what people might say about works like Midori. I don't think Midori is any different from anyone else's passion project, even if it is what it is. I know that's a point of controversy, with some feeling that Midori is nothing more than about an hour of torture and suffering. I don't know. That could be true, but why put so much time and effort into making it if that's all it ever was supposed to be? Fans of Midori and Harada's other works are adamant that there is a reason behind the making of Midori, a statement on his political views that shouldn't be dismissed due to the shock of the film. Some view the film as a statement on the effects of abuse. even finding comparisons between the events of the film and the isolation and damage done by bullying. It is widely known that Harada suffered bullying as a kid, which he often depicts in his films. Midori is relentlessly bullied and abused by the performers at the circus, and the film showcases that and her inability to actually overcome and recover. Harada says himself in an interview for the 2006 DVD release that bullying was a main theme of Midori, and he depicts this abuse and bullying because he knows what that's like. He knows that there are kids out there who suffer bullying and wishes to encourage these kids instead of just talking about bullying. I don't really understand what is encouraging about Midori, but I mean, if that's what he had in mind while making it, good for him. However, there are some who view the film and walk away feeling like they'd witnessed shock and horror for the sake of it with no substance. Art can be subjective though, and different people will pick up on different things and walk away with different meanings, if they find meaning in something at all. So, you know how I said that this was a banned anime at the start of the video? That actually is not true. Not entirely. I mean, if it was actually banned worldwide, would it really get multiple screenings over the years, physical releases in multiple countries, and a live-action adaptation in 2016? We'll get into that more in a bit. But you maybe can see why fans of the anime are a little disgruntled when that's how the conversation is led. Its status as being globally banned is partial misinformation that has been spread by clickbait articles and anime YouTubers. And I'm well aware of the fact that my own clickbait for this video perpetuates that, especially for those who don't watch this far into the video. In actuality, it is a bit more complicated. Midori had a censored release in 1994 at the request of the Japanese Film Censor Board. This censored version was used for future screenings, however, in 2006, the original and censored versions were both released on DVD by the French company Cinemalta. Things seemed to be fine until 1999, when the film was confiscated and supposedly destroyed by Japanese customs after Harada returned from a film festival in Spain, where the film was shown. This incident did cause the film to be temporarily banned in Japan for its obscene content. However, it was still screened at festivals. But by the time Harada did an interview for the 2006 DVD release, he stated that he was refraining from screening the film in Japan due to fear of problems that would arise. At this point in history, Midori gained a bit of reputation for being lost media, with the master copy presumably destroyed, and before 2006, there were no physical at-home releases of the film, making it inaccessible. However, that was due to change with the 2006 DVD release, and also the big find in 2013. Hidden away in the depths of an iMagica warehouse laid the original negatives of the film, the original in its truest form. With the negatives being uncovered, Harada was able to remaster the film in its original uncensored form. It's this uncensored version that has been screened ever since, and I believe this may have been the version that was uploaded to YouTube for a time. All I know is that apparently I've seen the original because the censored version does not show the mom being eaten by rats at the beginning, and I will never forget seeing that. However, the original soundtrack and a couple scenes that were only for in-person screenings are still effectively lost to the wider audience. But production materials and even an advertisement that aired on Japanese TV were found and released in 2022. One of the songs of the original soundtrack and footage of the first screening, including narration that was not included on the DVD release, were also found and put out for us to see. So that's pretty cool. The film continued to be screened after being banned, and we even saw international releases of the film. Plus, the manga that the film is adapting has been released, re-released, reprinted, translated into other languages over the years, and just it's very easily accessible. As easily accessible as an old manga can be, actually. If the film was really that obscene and banned worldwide, wouldn't that also be true for the manga that is equally as disturbing? Another point on this, I cannot find any credible sources on the banned nature of this film. At most, I was able to get clear answers on the film being banned from being screened in theaters in Japan for a limited amount of time. However, this does not seem to be enforced anymore, or the ban was lifted. There are countless articles and YouTube videos talking about the anime and claiming it to be banned across the globe to this day, but there are literally no sources. Literally none. I've looked for them. I complained to my mom about this. Midori was an independent project that did not see a wide-scale release. Hiroshi Harada wanted the film to be experienced in a very specific way, with live performances and circus-esque experiences that would provide the audience with a totally unexpected experience that you would lose when just watching a DVD or VHS tape at home. It's kept small and indie on purpose. All in all, it is true to say that the film had been banned in the past. However, to claim that it is globally banned and was never released physically is just simply not true. And overblown statements to make Midori sound more scandalous and clickbaity. And let's be real, this thing is no more gory than anime like Corpse Party or other pieces of media that have not been given the same banned and taboo treatment. Yes, it's upsetting. Yes, the story touches on the grotesque. And yes, Midori sits more in the obscene category. I think we can all agree on that. Also, yeah, I'm sure it is actually banned in some places, but it's not the worldwide ban that everyone claims it to be. If you know of any concrete sources for information on Midori being banned or not, please share them. I'll be so real, this was incredibly difficult to research, and maybe I just haven't learned the best places or phrases to search for, but when looking up anything related to Midori and its status as being banned, you are met with pages upon pages of YouTube videos and unsourced quick articles from websites that pay writers $5 per article and expect them to write multiple articles a day. I know that because I applied to one of those, and that was the terms of the contract. My main source for it not being banned is actually a Twitter thread. I realize that is not very sound research or journalism, but pictures of international releases was a lot more convincing that there was something amiss here than countless unsourced articles written by just anybody. Midori has become a cult classic in Japan and has seen some success on the global market. Although most of that is for the manga and not the film itself, the manga received an English translation and release in America in the 90s under the title Mr. Arashi's Amazing Freak Show, and has since been translated and released in many different countries. It's also been reprinted and re-released in Japan over the years, although some reprints do cut out a few panels for censorship, which fair. Jumping from the manga, as a part of the digital Gato series, there was an interactive CD-ROM for Windows 95 and Macintosh that was a colorized release of the manga that contained 3D rendered cutscenes and animations. As far as I could tell, this was released on April 25th in 1997. And finally, fast forward to 2016, where there was a live-action adaptation made. Under the title of Midori, the Camellia Girl, the film featured prominent actors including Shunsuke Kazama, the actor behind Yugi in Yu-Gi-Oh! I actually don't know if Yu-Gi-Oh! Is as popular in Japan as it got in the US. As for the live-action film itself, I'll be honest, I have not seen it, and I don't think I will, because for me, it's much harder to watch stories like this acted out by real people versus drawn on a page or digitally drawn on a computer. Although I have heard the live-action is not as graphic and a lot easier to watch. What I have seen in clips, though, the film is beautifully filmed and very, very bright with color, which I personally love. It also serves as a nice contrast to the dark material present in the story. I honestly love the over-the-top cartoonish feel of the costumes and set design, but that is a point of criticism for those who feel that the story was best left as an anime. I've also heard the live-action movie makes some changes to the story and creates a new ending for Midori. The live-action movie is pretty much double the length of the animated one, so I guess that checks that things needed to be changed and added in or whatnot. All in all, Midori, or Shoujo Tsubaki, was popular enough to garner international releases, adaptations, and a loyal following. Despite the manga or anime film remaining a mostly underground work that most anime fans know next to nothing about. I didn't mean to hyper-focus on this kind of obscure, infamous anime and the history surrounding it, but here we are. A video that no one asked for, but I'm grateful for those who stuck it out to the end or are also fascinated by the weird and media history, no matter how niche or underground it is. I don't think I'll ever do a deep dive into the actual story of Midori because nobody wants that. There are people who have done it already. I can link that down below if you're actually interested in hearing someone break down the story. I just find the history of how this anime came to be very, very interesting. It has always fascinated me ever since I learned about it and learned that it was made basically entirely by one person. I think that's awesome. And then once I found out that it wasn't actually banned across the globe, that sparked a weeks-long hyper-focused research. And now we have this video. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you all in the next video, whatever that may be. Yeah, that's it for me. Bye!